All right. I am your host, Jimmy Church, along with Billy Carson. And now we would like to welcome to the program Lou Elizondo.
All
How you
right.
doing, Lou? And for you to come in and join us, you and I are going to sit down now for the next couple of hours and discuss things and where we are today and what the future is. And for the audience that may not have been introduced to you before, I'm just going to do this very briefly and say that Lou Elizondo is the former director of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, otherwise known as ATIP. We have discussed that at length today. As a senior counterintelligence officer for the Department of Defense, he operated throughout Afghanistan, the Middle East, and Latin America. He is a trained special agent who has led countless tactical and strategic missions, both during wartime and at times at peace. Now, Lou's academic background does include microbiology, immunology, and parasitology, whatever that may be, with research experience in tropical diseases. Lou is also an inventor who holds several patents, and he is now in the vortex at the front of disclosure and all of the movement that is happening. Forbidden Disclosure Conference welcomes Lou Elizondo. Lou, welcome to the program. How are you, man?
Jimmy, Billy, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you.
Doing pretty good. As can be considered when you get my age, things start to make noises, and then you start to feel things that you didn't realize you could feel. But other than that, I'm doing quite well. Thanks for having me.
I would like to, Lou, if I may, what do you consider your role right now? If you were going to tell somebody what you are doing for this UFO UAP discussion that is going on, what would you define your role as?
Jimmy, I'd say I'm facilitating. There was an interesting comment made by Richard Dolan, one of your guests, just moments ago, and he said that the government doesn't know what to do or what to say. So my job is to help them with both. If we're successful, we will help the government both to know not just what to do, but how to speak the truth to the American people and do it in a way that is constructive, not destructive. We're not trying to in any way try to impugn individuals in the government. We're trying to help them have the conversation. I do think this is a difficult conversation to have for a lot of people. As difficult as this may be for you to have this conversation around the dinner table or maybe the water cooler, can you imagine being in a senior level staff meeting with a bunch of Pentagon brass, right? And saying, hey, what do you guys think about those UFOs? Half of them are probably going to look at you and probably recommend a psych eval, while the other half will probably look at you and say, what are you talking about? I think I may have read some headlines about some UAPs. Is that what you're referring to? So I do think we've come a long way in 3 years. I'm very, very hopeful. I think another thing I think that Mr. Dolan said, if I may, forgive me, I need my old man glasses for just a moment. One of the things he says is there's still momentum. And my response to that is now more than ever. We are at a pinnacle. I'm sorry, we are at a pinnacle for this conversation. There's not a day that goes by that I don't get a call from someone either in Washington or in Congress or in the press or the media saying, hey, we want either more information or we want to help. This is a topic that's very serious to me. We get conversations a lot from some folks on Capitol Hill where they will actually say something like, hey, you know what, I didn't want to say this publicly, but I actually was on a fishing trip with my son. And you know what, I saw something too. What was it? So my role, again, put very simply, is to facilitate this conversation, facilitate the effort. Again, what to do and what to say. That's what I'm trying to help with.
Are you getting pushback from Washington, D.C. in its complete form, Department of Defense, and, of course, the political side of things, from those that don't want this discussion?
When you say in its complete sense, the answer would be no. there is pushback, and I've been subject to it, and in fact, very recently, in fact. But it's from small pockets, elements, if you will. And by the way, those elements are getting smaller and smaller. We're making significant headway. I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but I was just, fortunately, I was part of an interesting meeting that occurred a couple of weeks ago, where we had a lot of people present. A lot of these people were both former and current government individuals. And there are entire collaborative spaces now that have been created within the intelligence community where people can come in, analysts, trained analysts, people that are trained to look for spies or terrorists, right, and develop targeting packages, being able to collaborate on the UAP topic. And there's a hunger, there's a desire, and there's all sorts of competing analysis, if you will, and alternative analysis being conducted. There's all sorts of theories now that are being brought forward, which is precisely what we needed to do. This is exactly what the conversation was intended to do. We can't look at the government as this, if you will, this big ominous structure, because it's not. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. It's comprised of many little pieces and parts, and some of those parts are against this issue. Other parts of this puzzle are rather neutral, and then there's other parts that are very, very supportive. And even up to 3 years ago, we didn't have that. And that puzzle is beginning to expand. The pieces of that puzzle that are more in favor and support of trying to figure this out every day is growing bigger and bigger. And there are absolute heroes every single day right now in the Department of Defense and the intelligence community that are looking at this topic. And they're putting all of their talents that they have into trying to decipher this for us. And there's a lot of compelling data out there. I guess if there was one thing I could tell my fellow Americans is that people are taking this seriously, and it will not and cannot be ignored any longer.
Well, those that are pushing back, are they pushing back, Lou, because this is a possible UFO, ET, extraterrestrial issue? Or are they pushing back because it's revealing secrets of possible technology and we don't want to tip the hat to our adversaries?
Well, or the third option, which is we don't know what it is, and we don't want to let our adversaries know that we don't know what it is.
Is that a reason to push back, though? That's not it wouldn't seem.
Well, it's a reason for sure to minimize something, and there's what makes it more complicated now. Why they can't do that is because other countries have stepped up and said, yeah, we're looking at this too. In fact, there's a couple of countries that are looking at this for not very good reasons, and I'm sure that information will come to light here soon as well. So that's problematic.
Let me jump in. You just said, and this is what I find this so interesting. You and others, right? They use the word this. This is something we need to be. This is something we need. This, but they're not saying UFOs. They're not saying UAP. They always speak like it's almost a subject in the third person, that nobody wants to address this directly. So when you say this, what are you referring to? What is this? Clear that up for me.
Sure. I don't think you can have a conversation just about nuts and bolts. Ultimately, there's something that is creating those nuts and bolts. There's something that is from a technological perspective, controlling these nuts and bolts, whatever these things are. So you can't just say a UAP. That's like saying a drone. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's a lot of different drones out there with a lot of different reasons that we fly drones. Some are hobbyists, some are doing geological surveys, some are using it for entertainment and filming, and those aren't the ones we're concerned with. But there's always an operator behind it, and there is an infrastructure behind it. When I say this, I'm looking at things from terms of the product of my environment being national security. It's never just a submarine that's a threat, because that submarine is being supplied by someone. There's food that and provisions that are being provided to it. There are energy performance capabilities and if you will, technologies associated with the propulsion that every so often, a submarine may have to go back in the dry dock for whatever reason, right? There are ports designed specifically for submarines. There's manufacturing facilities just for submarines. And so to say, well, submarines are a threat, well, it's more than that. There's so when I say this, what I'm referring to is the collective whole involving the UAP topic, because we don't know what's completely involved with this. topic of UAPs.
See,
Yeah,
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 it's so hard to get away from that.
right. And I think we need to be careful just saying UAP, because that's like saying a drone or a submarine, when in fact there's a bigger issue here. If you talk about the threats of nuclear submarines, it's not really the submarine that's a threat. It's the nuclear strike capabilities that they present, right? And their stealth. So it's the same thing with UAPs. It's not that a UAP flying around is necessarily a national security issue. It's the fact that we don't know where these things are from. It's the fact that we see them doing things and going places that to us seem a bit provocative, and the fact that we don't know where they are all the time and where they're coming in from.
So why can't we get back to, instead of saying this and they and this topic, and start to address these, even if it's just with UAP, where if I hear Marco Rubio say UAP from the bench of the Senate Intelligence Committee, I know he's on target, and the rest of the world knows what he's referring to, and not this and they and those.
Right. Well, I don't necessarily disagree, but I think one could draw a similarity to the conversation, let's say, about cryptocurrency, right? When you say cryptocurrency, most people, their eyes kind of glaze over and they go, what? I don't understand, right? If you say Bitcoin, people go, oh, I know what that is. Yeah, I know what a Bitcoin is. I think kind of maybe this is kind of the same thing, a little bit similar, where when you say UAP, people tend to get a little bit, it seems to be convoluted. But I will say, though, from a personal perspective, and strictly from a personal perspective, and by the way, let me also put this out real quick before we go further down. The views of other presenters on here, I want to make sure it's very clear that I don't necessarily agree or disagree with other people's views, and just like I don't expect anybody to necessarily agree or disagree with my views, they are my views. So I just want to make sure to your audience this is very clear that me being on this show isn't necessarily an endorsement or a rejection of anybody else or their opinions. It's simply I'm here to have a conversation with you and your audience from the perspectives that I was privy to, and so let me put that out. Secondly, as far as the reason why I just don't like the term UFO, besides the baggage and the stigma that's typically associated with it, because I'm not sure if that's even accurate anymore, and neither are the scientists that I've worked with. Because let's take a look at this pen for a second, right? An unidentified, we could say this is unidentified, flying. Well, what's flying? Well, it's the principles of flight, right? You have wings and control surfaces, and you have thrust, lift, drag and weight, and you have, because of that, you create these lifting bodies, that wings that create lift, and you fly. But we don't see those type of things associated with UAP or UFO. What we are seeing are these objects that seemingly can maneuver in our atmosphere, but they don't have the associated technologies such as wings or control surfaces or rudders or ailerons or elevators, or they don't seem to have any obvious signs of propulsion or any type of cockpit. So to say that they're flying, quote, flight, may not even be accurate. Yes, they're in our atmosphere, but they may not be using the same type of principles, if you will, of technology that we use in order to fly. And so as we begin to understand this phenomenon a little bit more year after year, some of these legacy terms, we're probably going to have to wind up changing to some degree.
Let's change gears a little bit. The report, the UAP Task Force report, was released. Unclassified version of the report was 9 pages. You can plus or minus, like there were six pages of actual text. The classified version of the report, there were a lot of numbers that were thrown around about the page count on that. What was revealed in the unclassified portion was that there were 144 cases that were investigated. It has been publicly stated by ODNI as of yesterday that the classified version of the report is only 17 pages. And well, before you answer, that seems like a pretty low page count to cover 144 cases. Well, 143. I think they solved one in the public version of the report. Right. But so that 17-page count seems pretty low. So what's your answer to that?
Well, it's simply not. I think there's some confusion. I think maybe some people may be confused with an executive summary that may have been provided, but the actual report was north of 70 pages. including endnotes. And that's real. And that's, you know, that'll come out at some point. I think someone's trying to willingly deceive the American people by saying, oh, it was only 17 pages. I think, you know, when you go through PAO offices, as we've seen, they don't always get things right. And when they say, oh, yeah, the executive summary that was provided to Congress was 17 pages. Oh, okay, 17 pages. But that wasn't the complete report. The complete report with endnotes was north of 70 pages. And that's just a fact.
Have you seen the 17 pages?
Have I seen the 17 or 70?
17.
I'm not going to go into what I have seen or haven't seen.
Okay, well, let me ask you about this. Okay, let me ask you about the 17 pages then, which is this. What's the difference between the classified 17 pages and the unclassified 9?
Well, you know, you're getting a lot of sources and methods. You're getting call signs, you're getting locational data, you're getting individuals and witnesses that they spoke to, right? So there's a lot of, you know, the type of sensor units that were done, the offices that they went to verify and validate information. There's a lot to it, and that information needs to be protected, and understandably so. At the end of the day, I think the American people just want to know, you know, what's going on. They don't really necessarily care the little individual offices that were necessarily involved. They don't care about, you know, the call sign data. They just want to know, look, what is it, and you know, how does it work, and what are we going to do about it? Unfortunately, the unclassified report didn't really address any of those. But I know you make a really good point, Jimmy. Let's dissect that for a minute, because I think words are important, and I'm not sure people really appreciate what was in that report. First of all, with very few memory, there's a lot of hype behind this report, right? So they had to produce something. The American government, after 6 months, said out of 144 incidents, we only solved one. And oh, by the way, these are real objects because they were picked up on multiple sensor units. So, you know, of course, people are like, well, it's atmospheric anomaly. It just says in the report right there in black and white. Most of these are probably real things. It also says in the very first sentence of one of the very first words of the very first sentence of the very first paragraph is that this is a preliminary report. What does preliminary mean? It means one, the first of, several to follow. So this isn't going away. And when you look at the report, they say 144 reports, and people are even including the one from the Nimitz. Well, it was only one from the Nimitz. Everything else, when you read the report later on, I think page 5 or 6, you can read between the lines. It says, all these reports were a result of Navy reporting beginning in 2019. In fact, November 2019. So in a year and a half, there were 143 to 142 incidents alone involving just the Navy. It says, well, the Air Force is going to catch up. They haven't really got the reporting requirements straight yet. So these are for the most part from the Navy. So out of 140 some incidents, these incidents occurred in just the last year and a half, and just the Navy, not the Army, not the Coast Guard, not the Air Force, right? So that is a huge number of unknowns. And some of these incidents occurred over hours, right? You still don't know what they are. Furthermore, when you read the report, it says that the majority of the reports were never reported. And the reason why is because of the stigma and the taboo and fear of retribution. By the way, ask me how I know. So that retribution is real. So that being the case, let's just say on the conservative side that, I don't know, maybe 10% of all incidents were reported. And you now have 144 from the Navy alone. Well, that's really the 1,400 incidents that actually occurred just the last year and a half alone, and just involving the Navy. So
in the last year and a half,
2019. That's what that report says. It's in black. Look, that's not me. That's what the report says. Read the report. You'll see it black and white. Page 5 or 6, it says that the majority of these incidents, and actually page 3, I think, as well. I've had the whole thing highlighted. It talks about that the majority of these incidents go unreported because of this fear and retribution. And what I'm doing here is just saying, you know, hypothetically, let's just take a 10% average. One out of every 10 incidents gets reported. The math then suggests that over 1,400 incidents have occurred in just the last year and a half alone. Just looking at the statistics, just looking at the math and probability. That's all. It's really pretty simple, that equation. Now, maybe it's 30%. Okay, fine. So in that case, 455 incidents occurred with, in the last year and a half alone involving the Navy. That's still a problem. It's still an issue for us because we only solved one.
How many were us? How many were U.S. Tech?
Well, I would say mostly zero, maybe in a far remote possibility, one or two squeaked by because we failed to coordinate this very well. But that doesn't make sense. Those numbers, when we are talking about a nuclear strike group going out with all the best of the best, and you're talking about a fleet of ships highly capable. Air Force doesn't go around messing around testing super secret aircraft around these type of footprints because they're going to get a lot of trouble. Chances are you could have chances for a mid-air collision, or you could actually wind up getting shot down. There's all sorts of issues there. So, I think to say that maybe somebody failed to coordinate something somewhere at some time, and maybe one of these things was a secret U.S. capability. Okay, maybe, but the vast majority are certainly not.
How much of this is foreign? And the reason why I bring that up is in the report, they play it both ways. They say no, and then they follow it up with, well, it's still a possibility.
Right.
So how much of this is earthbound foreign technology?
Well, first of all, you don't know what you don't know, right? So if you don't know what this is, then anything it could be because you don't know what it is. So they have to say this could be foreign technology potentially, knowing full well that it is so remotely unlikely to be the case. Because let's look at the best drone technology we have, and I'm going to be very careful what I say here. Make sure I don't upset anybody back in DC. But let's say here's our little pen again. This is a drone. There's two types of drones for the most part, and there's other ones as well. There's hybrids and drones and whatnot. But you have those that can take off vertically, kind of like a quadcopter, right? And they can hover and they can loiter around for a little while. And then you've got those that are fixed wing and they can fly long range, but they have to fly fast enough to create lift and to continue to move, right? So think a Predator or something like that. The ones that move fast and fixed wing can fly really far, but they have a very hard time loitering. They have to fly racetracks. They can't just stop and hover and loiter for 20, 30 minutes. And just like the quadcopters that can hover, right? They have a hard time loiterability because you need fuel, and fuel is weight, and weight to a rotary wing vertical lift is the devil, right? So you want to be as light as possible, and that's why a lot of these little quadcopters are so light. So if you wanted to launch something over a Navy ship that can hover over the flight deck, as been reported through the Omaha and the Kidd incidents, then you're talking about a drone capability that is probably not a fixed wing long range capability. It means it has to be launched from somewhere nearby, even 2-3 miles. As far as you can with some of the more, if you will, commercially available control systems. Even the best military systems, you have some much longer capability, but you still have to launch them and you have to recover them. You don't just let them crash into the ocean because then they can be found, right? So they have to be launched from somewhere, and they have to be controlled from somewhere by someone. And there's an infrastructure, a huge footprint that is required to do that. You need a trained operator to do it with enough juice where he can send out a signal to your quadcopter, and your quadcopter can react, and then enough, if you will, payload on this so it can send the signal back to the operator. The operator knows where the drone is, it's looking at pictures and all that stuff, and then be able to fly the drone all the way back. So there's more practical challenges with trying to create something like that. If you're talking about a fixed wing drone, that's a little easier, but it's got to keep moving. It's got to be moving fairly fast, and it's not just going to stop and hover. So therein lies the problem. You can, if you want to loiter, you've got to launch it from relatively nearby. Now, the Navy has sea domain awareness. They are the best at knowing anything that's in the ocean. These guys know. That's how we catch these drug runners coming in on these little tiny submersibles that you can barely see. There's a reason we catch them. So we know if there is, let's say, a Chinese frigate nearby that's launching drones, we know that. A lot of these ships have transponders on them. AIS. We know, unless they're squawking black, meaning they're not transmitting. Then we have other ways to find out, who's in our area, and we have very high fidelity radar systems, and we have electro-optical systems. So it's unlikely. I'm not saying it's impossible, because the Chinese have harassed us before, and vice versa, with unmanned aerial vehicles and aerial systems. And by the way, that technology is improving exponentially almost every year. So at some point, these things may have that capability that we're seeing, but right now they don't. And that's the problem. That foreign adversarial technology isn't where it needs to be for us to see the things that we're seeing. It's not there yet. It might be there in 10, 15, 20 years, but it's not there now. And that's why this is a problem. That's why we need to have this conversation, because if it's not US technology and it's not foreign adversarial technology, then
what's left?
Yeah, whose technology is it, right? I mean, we have to have that conversation. You can't have an intellectual, a truly objective conversation about this topic and not introduce that as potentially part of the calculus.
Okay, so without saying they, them, or though, or this, who is operating these vehicles?
That's the problem. We don't know. It's not us. It's not human, for the most part.
It's not my miniature schnauzer either.
Yeah, it's certainly not my dog. It's not my daughters. It's not my wife. It's not me. And I had access along with my colleagues, and right now the people in the IC, the intelligence community, have pretty good access themselves. And when you're saying, well, we saw this out there, they're going to, first thing to do is going to run through the database and say, okay, these ships were in the area, and that's it. And these ships are, it's a Coast Guard ship. There's a pleasure yacht out there, and there's a ship from Norway that's carrying, if you will, it's on a cruise, and it's got a bunch of passengers on it. Okay, so we have these lights in the sky. They're hovering over our flight deck, sometimes for minutes, if not some cases, as reported, potentially hours and even days, coming back and kind of harassing the ships. Who has that capability, right? It's not the U.S. Coast Guard that's harassing the Navy, that's for sure.
Certainly. And so for those that are listening to this conversation, Lou, and will watch this later, they're going to say, okay, well, it's not Russia, it's not China, it's not us. Well, then it's got to be ET. Can we have that conversation?
There's no way we cannot have the conversation and at least discuss it, because data is data, and the data is agnostic. It doesn't care what you think. The data is just what it is. And it's up to us to put our personal bias